Your Ford F-150's EcoBoost turbos are being destroyed right now by habits and settings most owners consider completely harmless. I've been working on turbocharged Ford engines for over 15 years, and I can tell you straight, turbo failure on these trucks is almost never bad luck. It is almost always caused by the same 4 or 5 owner behaviors, repeated thousands of times until the damage becomes irreversible. Today I'm exposing every single one of them because a replacement turbocharger on the 3.5-liter EcoBoost costs between $2,000 and $5,000 per unit depending on labor, and you have 2 of them. Before we get into the specific behaviors that are killing your turbos, you need to understand what a turbocharger actually is and why it is so uniquely vulnerable compared to every other component in your engine. The twin turbos on the 3.5-liter and 2.7-liter EcoBoost are spinning at over 150,000 revolutions per minute when the truck is working hard. That is not a typo. The only thing keeping the turbo shaft from destroying itself at those speeds is a pressurized film of engine oil floating between the shaft and the bearing housing. That oil film is approximately 1/1000th of an inch thick. It is thinner than a human hair. Remove it, degrade it, contaminate it, or interrupt it for even a few seconds at high speed, and the shaft begins to make contact with the housing. Metal touches metal at 150,000 revolutions per minute. The damage that follows is rapid and catastrophic. Now that you understand what the turbo depends on to survive, every single behavior I am about to describe will make complete sense. The first and most destructive thing you are doing to your turbos right now is shutting the engine off immediately after hard driving, highway runs, or towing. This one behavior alone is responsible for more EcoBoost turbo failures than any other factor I see in the shop. And the reason is a phenomenon called oil coking. Here is exactly what happens. When you are towing a heavy trailer or pulling hard onto a highway on-ramp, your turbos are spinning at or near their maximum revolutions per minute, generating enormous heat in the center bearing housing. The engine oil flowing through that housing is absorbing heat continuously, carrying it away and protecting the bearings. When you arrive at your destination and immediately shut the engine off, the oil pump stops and oil circulation stops, but the turbocharger keeps spinning for several seconds on inertia, and the exhaust manifold right next to the turbo housing continues radiating heat into the bearing center section with no oil moving through to carry that heat away. The oil that was inside the bearing housing when the engine stopped does not drain immediately. It sits there trapped in a metal cavity surrounded by hundreds of degrees of residual heat, and it cooks. It literally bakes from a liquid lubricant into a hard carbon deposit called coke. Those carbon deposits coat the bearing surfaces, restrict oil flow passages, and over time create a rough surface where there needs to be a mirror smooth surface. The shaft develops play, the bearings make noise, power drops, and then you get a $3,000 repair bill. The fix is so simple it almost seems too easy to be worth mentioning, but I promise you it is worth mentioning. After any extended highway drive, after any towing session, after any situation where you push the truck hard, let the engine idle for 60 to 90 seconds before you shut it off. That is it. 60 seconds of idling allows the oil pump to continue circulating clean oil through the turbo center section, carrying heat away and preventing that oil from baking into carbon deposits. 60 seconds is how long it takes to check your phone. It is how long it takes to gather your belongings. It requires nothing from you. Many EcoBoost owners install a turbo timer, an inexpensive device that keeps the engine running for a set period after you remove the key, so the cooling down process happens automatically, even when you forget. They cost about $30 to $80 and install in under an hour. If you tow regularly or drive aggressively, a turbo timer is one of the best investments you can make for the long-term health of your turbos. Start doing this tonight. The second behavior destroying your turbos is running extended oil change intervals, and this is where Ford's own recommendations are actively working against you. Ford programmed the Intelligent Oil Life Monitor in modern F-150s to suggest oil change intervals that can stretch to 10,000 miles under certain conditions. That interval may be acceptable for a naturally aspirated engine operating in ideal conditions, but it is genuinely dangerous for the turbocharged EcoBoost in real-world truck use. Here is why. The turbocharger runs at extreme temperatures and places enormous thermal stress on the oil that flows through the bearing housing. Under boost, the oil temperature inside the turbo center section can reach 300 degrees or higher. At those temperatures, oil oxidizes. The long-chain polymer molecules in the oil break down into shorter, weaker molecules that provide less viscosity and less film strength. The oil gets thin. The crucial 1/1000th of an inch film between the shaft and the bearing housing gets thinner. And if the oil has also accumulated soot and combustion byproducts from the EcoBoost's known blow-by issues, those fine abrasive particles circulate through the turbo bearings every time the engine runs. Ford technician and EcoBoost expert Brian Maculocco, known as Ford Tech Maculocco, has demonstrated this problem in detail using a real engine from a customer's 2015 Ford Expedition with the 3.5-liter EcoBoost. The engine failed at 224,000 miles, despite having the potential to reach 300,000 miles with proper maintenance. The cause was extended oil change intervals that allowed blow-by soot to accumulate and eventually block the turbocharger oil intake screens. With the screens blocked, oil starvation destroyed both turbos. The lesson could not be clearer. Ford recommends 5W30 full synthetic oil for the EcoBoost specifically because full synthetic holds up under high heat better than conventional or synthetic blend oil. Change it every 5,000 miles regardless of what the Oil Life Monitor says, and shorten that to every 3,000 to 5,000 miles if you tow regularly, make frequent short trips where the engine never fully reaches operating temperature, or if you operate in hot climates where ambient heat adds additional stress to the oil. The $60 oil change every 5,000 miles is the cheapest turbo insurance money can buy. Skipping it to save time and money is how you end up paying $5,000 for a turbo replacement instead. Here is a closely related issue that compounds the oil problem significantly, and most owners have no idea it is happening. The EcoBoost engines, particularly first-generation trucks from 2011 through 2016 with the 3.5-liter, are known for excessive blow-by. Blow-by occurs when combustion gases and oil vapor escape past the piston rings and enter the crankcase. The positive crankcase ventilation system, the PCV system, is designed to route this blow-by vapor back into the intake tract so it gets burned rather than venting raw hydrocarbons into the atmosphere. The problem is that the vapor carries fine oil mist with it, and that mist circulates through the entire intake system, including the turbocharger compressor housing and the intercooler. Over time, the tiny oil intake screens that protect the turbo bearing housing from contaminants get partially clogged with the accumulated residue. When those screens restrict oil flow, the bearing film thins. The turbo begins to run on inadequate lubrication at 150,000 revolutions per minute. Bearing wear accelerates, and because the damage happens gradually over tens of thousands of miles, owners never feel the single moment when the problem starts. The solution is an oil catch can installed in the PCV system. Ford Performance Parts acknowledges this problem badly enough that they sell their own catch can kits specifically engineered for the EcoBoost, part number M-6766-35T, for 2017 through 2020 trucks, and M-6766-35TA for 2021 and newer models. Third-party options from J&L and Mishimoto are also well regarded and install without permanent modification to the truck. The catch can intercepts the PCV vapor before it reaches the intake and turbo system, allowing the oil droplets to condense and collect in a small canister you drain at every oil change. It is not a dramatic fix. It does not add power. It does not make the truck faster. What it does is reduce the contamination that clogs those critical turbo oil screens, extend the life of the intercooler, and slow down the intake valve carbon buildup that plagues direct injection engines. It is a $100 to $200 investment that protects a $4,000 to $6,000 twin turbo system. That is one of the most favorable cost-benefit ratios in automotive maintenance.
The third behavior, quietly destroying your turbos, is cold start abuse, meaning you start the truck and immediately drive it hard without letting oil pressure fully build and circulate to the turbo bearings. This one is misunderstood by a lot of owners because modern fuel injection genuinely does not need a long warm-up period for the combustion system to function. You can start the truck and drive away in normal traffic almost immediately without hurting the fuel or ignition system. But the turbocharger is a different story. On a cold start, the engine oil is thick and cold. It takes a few seconds for the oil pump to draw oil from the pan, build pressure, and push it through the oil lines to the turbo bearing housing. During those first seconds after startup, the turbo bearings are running on nothing but residual oil film from the last time the truck ran. If you start the truck in the driveway, immediately pull onto the road and floor it to merge onto the highway, you are spinning those turbo bearings at extreme revolutions per minute during the brief window when they are running on minimal lubrication. The bearing surfaces take damage. You cannot see it or hear it initially, but over thousands of cold start events, those microscopic damage events accumulate into measurable shaft play and eventually into turbo replacement. The habit change required here is minimal and costs nothing. After starting the truck on a cold morning, give it 30 to 60 seconds before applying heavy throttle. Normal, light throttle driving during the first minute or two is perfectly fine and allows the oil to reach proper temperature and viscosity before you ask the turbos to generate serious boost pressure. This is especially important in winter when oil temperatures are lower and the oil is thicker and slower to flow. Synthetic 5W30 flows faster at cold temperatures than conventional oil, which is another reason Ford specifies full synthetic for these engines, and not just because it lasts longer between changes. Truck owners who live in cold climates and use remote start should be aware that remote start alone does not fully address this issue for the turbo if they immediately accelerate hard the moment they get in. Let the engine settle for at least a minute before any aggressive acceleration on cold days. The fourth behavior destroying your turbos is one that Ford actually enabled through the software in these trucks, and it involves the way the auto start-stop system interacts specifically with the turbocharger. Most EcoBoost owners already know that auto start-stop is hard on starter motors and cam phasers, and many have disabled it or installed permanent defeat devices for those reasons. But there is a turbo-specific problem with start-stop that gets far less attention. When the start-stop system shuts the engine off at a traffic light, oil circulation to the turbocharger stops. The turbos cool down. The oil sitting in the bearing housing begins to lose viscosity as it cools toward ambient temperature. When the engine restarts a few seconds later, the turbos immediately begin spinning again as the engine fires. But the oil pressure takes a fraction of a second to fully rebuild. During that fraction of a second, the turbo bearings are spinning on oil that has not yet been pressurized to full film thickness. Every single start-stop event puts the turbos through a micro cold start cycle. In stop-and-go city traffic where start-stop activates dozens of times per trip, the turbos experience dozens of these low lubrication restart events in a single commute. The long-term effect is accelerated bearing wear that shows up earlier than it should on trucks that spend most of their time in city driving. Disabling auto start-stop is straightforward. There is a button on the dashboard or center console typically labeled with a capital A with a circle around it. Press it once after each startup and the system stays off for that drive session. Ford does not allow permanent factory disabling because the system is required for EPA fuel economy certification. But aftermarket devices called Auto Stop Eliminator, made specifically for Ford vehicles, plug into the existing wiring and automatically disable start-stop every time the truck starts,
without requiring any button press. They cost $100 to $150, install in about 15 minutes, and are widely used by EcoBoost owners who understand what start-stop is doing to their cam phasers and turbos. For a truck used primarily in city commuting, this is one of the most practical modifications available. The fifth behavior destroying your turbos is not a driver habit, but a maintenance neglect item that most owners skip without realizing the consequences, ignoring the early warning signs of wastegate problems. The wastegate on each EcoBoost turbocharger is a valve that controls how much exhaust gas bypasses the turbine wheel. It regulates boost pressure by diverting exhaust gas around the turbine when boost has reached its target level. On earlier EcoBoost models, particularly 2011 through 2016, the wastegate actuator arm linkage is a known weak point. The connection between the actuator and the wastegate flap develops play over time as the bushing wears, and the hole in the lever arm goes from round to oval. When this happens, the wastegate cannot fully control boost pressure. A stuck-open wastegate causes underboost, meaning the engine makes less power than it should. A stuck-closed wastegate causes overboost, which pushes combustion pressures and temperatures beyond safe limits and can cause detonation. Ford even issued Technical Service Bulletin Number 25/2008 in February 2025 for the 2024 F-150 2.7-liter EcoBoost, addressing wastegate rattle caused by a missing wave spring between the actuator lever arm and the turbine housing, and requiring installation of a spring kit using part number RL3Z9G488D on both left and right turbochargers. The fact that this bulletin exists tells you everything you need to know about how common and persistent this problem is across EcoBoost generations. The warning sign you need to listen for is a distinct rattling or chattering noise from the turbo area during cold starts or light throttle operation. It typically sounds like a loose piece of metal vibrating against the housing. Many owners hear this noise for months and assume it is normal, or they assume it is a heat shield rattling rather than the wastegate. It is not normal. It is the wastegate arm with loose tolerances hammering against the housing with every change in boost pressure. If you catch it early, the repair is relatively simple. If you ignore it and the wastegate freezes in place due to carbon buildup or physical failure, you are looking at a full turbocharger replacement. A replacement turbocharger for the 3.5-liter EcoBoost runs $1,200 to $1,800 at an independent shop, or $2,500 to $3,500 at a Ford dealer per unit, and you have two of them. If the bolts holding the turbocharger to the exhaust manifold seize, which they frequently do on high-mileage heat-cycled trucks, the labor cost climbs significantly further because a seized stud can turn a straightforward turbo swap into a cylinder head repair. The single biggest takeaway from everything in this video is that turbo failure on the EcoBoost is almost entirely a maintenance and habit problem, not a fundamental design flaw. The engines that reach 200,000 miles with the original turbos intact are the engines whose owners change oil every 5,000 miles with the correct full synthetic oil. Let the engine idle down after hard work. Do not abuse the throttle during cold startups. Disable auto start-stop, and listen for the wastegate rattle before it becomes a wastegate failure. Every one of those behaviors costs you nothing but a small amount of attention and discipline. The turbo failures I see in the shop almost always come from trucks where at least 2 or 3 of those habits were absent, compounding damage slowly and silently over years without ever triggering a warning light until it was too late. Change your oil every 5,000 miles without exception. Idle the engine down for 60 seconds after you tow or push it hard. Give it 30 to 60 seconds after every cold start before heavy throttle. Disable auto start-stop every time you drive. And listen to your truck when it starts making noises it did not make before, because the wastegate rattle that sounds like a loose heat shield is almost never a loose heat shield. Do all of that consistently, and your EcoBoost turbos will easily outlast almost everything else in the drivetrain.
The EcoBoost is a genuinely capable engine when it is maintained correctly, and the owners who treat it that way are the ones who never end up on the forum asking why their truck needs 2 new turbos at 90,000 miles. If you found this valuable, subscribe and hit the notification bell. I cover real mechanical information that Ford owners need to hear before they end up with a repair bill that should never have happened. Drop a comment below telling me whether your truck has ever given you the wastegate rattle, because that noise is far more common than most people realize, and far too many owners mistake it for something minor. I will see you in the next one.